Welcome to this Tuesday, January 18th, Committee of the Whole meeting. Look at that. I think he did that on purpose, but that's all right. Welcome back, Mr. Green, Mr. Mayor Green.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Apologies for that. I was just driving back from Des Moines this afternoon. So we are in work session, thanks to Simon Harding. And our one topic that we have for this afternoon is a discussion of downtown zoning changes. We've got 45 minutes set aside for that with Planning and Community Services Manager Karen Howard. So Ms. Howard, if you'd like to take the floor for us.
Okay, I just have a brief presentation just to go over what we're going to talk about tonight, what we heard from the council at your last meeting, is just go over a little bit about the legislative process it would take to amend the code. And then some of the issues of discussion that we heard from council last time were, missing middle housing, that comparison of what the old zones and the new zones, what is an accessory dwelling unit and where it's allowed, vinyl siding, discussion about that being an allowed material, what the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission is, and then, of course, our favorite topic that we've discussed a number of times, but an important one is the private parking requirements, including discussion about shared parking. So just a brief recap, this zoning code changes were drafted in February of 21. Of course, the Planning and Zoning Commission met a number of different times at work sessions and public hearings, heard requests for changes to the original draft. They made some of those changes and then voted unanimously to forward the recommended draft to the council in May. After a number of work sessions and committee of the whole meetings and public hearings, the council adopted the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommended draft of the code on November 1st. Then on January 3rd, there was a referral from the council, of course, to discuss certain amendments or even to rescind the new code. Just a little bit about the legislative process, what it takes to amend a zoning ordinance, and a lot of this is based on our city code, but also our city code is based on state code as well. The city council or any person for that matter may forward a petition to the Planning and Zoning Commission to amend the zoning ordinance. P&Z then reviews that and sets a public hearing, holds a public hearing, and then votes to approve, disapprove, or approve with modifications the request to them, and then forwards it on, of course, to the council where you set a public hearing and hold public hearings and readings. One thing I did want to note is if P&Z approves an amendment request, a simple majority of the council is required at 3 separate readings to adopt that amendment to the code. However, if P&Z disapproves an amendment that's forwarded to them, a petition that's forwarded to them, 2/3 majority vote of the council at 3 separate readings is required to adopt that amendment. Just a little bit about the boundaries. I wanted to show that again of what the previous zoning designations were. This is the previous zoning map with the downtown overlay superimposed over that. You can see that it was the downtown overlay largely covered commercial zoning. The underlying zones were C1, C2, and C3. There was some industrial zoning in the downtown area, M1 and M2. And then the neighborhoods south and west of the downtown are zoned largely R3 and R4. There is, on this map, you can see the little arrows there pointing to the one block of R2 zoning that was in the study area just north of the elementary school, and then 1/2 block that was north of First Street that was C2, or R2, excuse me. There was no R1 zoning in this area. This is the new zoning map that was adopted. These are the new zoning designations. Storefront is basically along historic Main Street. Urban general is the greater urban zone just around that Main Street area. Urban General 2 then is that transition into the neighborhoods. And then neighborhood medium is largely southeast of downtown. And the neighborhood small is west of downtown, that Overman Park area. Discussion about missing middle housing, and just a little explanation what that is. I know it's kind of a buzz term right now, and sometimes, maybe we should stay away from buzz terms, but what it includes is duplexes, townhomes, small apartment buildings, cottage courts, accessory dwelling units. And it's called missing because it used to be common in traditional neighborhoods prior to World War II, but in many cities is now largely prohibited, due to adoption of extensive single-family zoning. And you can see some of those in our traditional neighborhoods. There are a number of missing middle housing types. There's townhomes and duplexes that are scattered throughout some of the neighborhoods around downtown. There's a surge in popularity right now because there's a real interest in these alternative housing types because of the retiring baby boom generation, and the new millennials are preferring kind of more urban living, or some of them are anyway. So it offers an alternative housing options for a variety of household sizes, incomes, and stages of life. And where appropriate zoning standards are adopted, these housing types can be sized and designed to fit into those neighborhoods, similar to how they were prior to World War II. So comparing what we had before, the R3 and R4, there's a little chart I put together, and I also handed that out just for your reference. So you can compare the previous zones, R3 and R4, and I also included the R1 and R2 because there was questions about that, how that compared. So you can see here that all those, the single family, of course, is allowed in all of them, old and new. And then duplexes, townhomes, small apartment buildings are allowed in all of them, the old and the new. The R3 and R4 were multifamily zones, so it allowed all those things. That's where we start to see a little difference, though, between the new zoning and the old zoning, is the R3 and R4 were multifamily zones. There weren't any controls on the size of the buildings other than the height limit. So while the new zoning allows small apartment buildings, it doesn't allow large apartment buildings. So whereas the old zoning, R3 and R4, allowed unlimited size buildings to take up, it could take up a whole half a block or whatever with a large building, otherwise just controlled by setbacks and building height. Accessory dwelling units, I'll explain that a little bit more because you had a question about that. But these are something new that we haven't talked about before. But in the new zones, they would be allowed in single-family owner-occupied only properties, small units, 1 bedroom maximum. The other zones allowed duplexes, so basically if you had 2 units on a lot, it would be considered a duplex. Commercial, there was also, I think, some rumors flying around that the new zoning would allow commercial everywhere. And of course, that's not true. The neighborhood zones don't allow commercial. I'd note that in the R4 zone previously, it did allow quite a few different office type uses. So it did allow commercial, so there were some commercial uses already in existence, and those are then grandfathered in with the new zoning, and they can continue to operate. And then won't allow mixed use, of course, in the neighborhood small and neighborhood medium. One thing I did want to point out is a single family conversion. I know there was discussion in neighborhood stabilization efforts in the past. And what that means is converting an existing single family house to breaking it up into like a duplex or a multiplex. And there were some concerns about that in years past. And I know in the R1 and R2 zone, we now disallow that to occur. We don't allow conversions of single family houses into multiplexes. However, in the R3 and R4 zones, there wasn't a disallowance of that. But in the new zones, because we knew that there was concern about that in these neighborhoods, we continued that disallowance of conversion in the neighborhood small and neighborhood medium, similar then to the R1 and R2 zones. Going back to the building scale again, you can just see here on this chart how we limit with the new zones, the neighborhood small and neighborhood medium. The idea is that if you're going to have multifamily or some of these other types of housing, it needs to be within the scale of a large single family house, so that it kind of fits into the scale of the neighborhood. So it limits the height and also limits the bulk of the building. It can only be 60 feet wide in neighborhood small and no more than 80 feet wide in the neighborhood medium, whereas the previous zones were really not limited at all. There was a question about what is an accessory dwelling unit. These are small units that are associated or with a single family, accessory to a single family owner occupied house. They had to be located in the rear yard, above a garage, or in a daylight basement. There's a size limit, can only be one bedroom, maximum 600 square feet. There's a maximum number of occupants to keep that scale low of 2 adults. There's no additional parking required for an accessory dwelling unit. The intent behind this is to support owner occupancy of the older homes in the neighborhoods and support multi-generational housing and provide some additional income potentially for homeowners. And then provide some additional alternative small units close to the downtown area. There was quite a bit of discussion about vinyl siding and building material standards at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and this is the approach that they settled on. Just so you're aware, previously the Central Business District overlay had building material standards in the code, and those standards did not allow vinyl siding for commercial, mixed use, and multifamily buildings. So that was already disallowed. So the new code continues that same prohibition, but it extends it to the neighborhood areas, of course, and then prohibits any new multifamily residential building and any new single-family dwelling from siding it with vinyl. That was a change. However, the new code does allow vinyl siding on all existing single-family dwellings, even if they don't have it now. Somebody could take their wood-sided housing and put vinyl siding on it. Also, any existing buildings with vinyl siding can continue to have vinyl siding and can replace the vinyl siding, and any additions they build onto can also be sided with vinyl. So that's how sort of the middle ground that the Planning and Zoning Commission settled on. So some options, if you'd want to discuss that tonight, is to leave it as P&Z recommended, or to add an allowance for vinyl siding on any new single-family dwelling. You can add an allowance for vinyl siding on any new residential building with less than 7 units. Those two changes would make it the same as what was previously in the Central Business District overlay standard. So we're making an assumption here that the council would like to maintain that prohibition previously applied in the overlay area. This was discussed by Community Main Street, and those were the standards that were adopted a couple of years ago. With regard to Planning and Zoning Commission review, I just wanted to show here the only area where Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council review new development or changes to buildings is in the Central Business District overlay. All the other zoning districts that are outside the overlay in the study area, the R3, R4, any C1, C2 areas outside the overlay are not reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission right now. The powers of the Planning and Zoning Commission are outlined in the city code. I won't read them on the screen here, but basically it's to plan for the future and to do rezonings and subdivisions, considerations of amendments to the zoning code. The review of site plans is not one of the official duties listed in the zoning ordinance for the Planning and Zoning Commission. That has evolved over the years in more recent zoning districts that were adopted and in some of the overlay zones. That was when we started having the Planning and Zoning Commission review site plans. And one of those reasons, and I wanted to point this out, I'm not going to go through this chart, but this is a comparison chart between the commercial zones and some of the new, more urban zones. But what I wanted to point out is this yellow stripe is the CBD overlay here. And this is one of the reasons that there was P&Z and council review, because the standards were fairly vague in the Central Business District overlay in a lot of cases. For example, just giving you an idea, the C3 district has a height limit of 165 feet. But the CBD overlay basically says that new buildings should be architecturally compatible with surrounding structures. So that led to a lot of debates about how tall buildings should be in the downtown area. Every case that came through was kind of debated, and sometimes builders had to go back and forth and redesign their buildings based on a lot of different opinions about, how tall the building should be. So the new code basically set some standards, had based on what we heard during the vision planning process, what we heard from a lot of different folks about what the scale of the building should be in the downtown. So the new maximum is 4 stories, 3 stories on Main Street, and 3 stories in that urban general 2, which is that transition into the neighborhoods. So that is one of the reasons why we really needed that Planning and Zoning Commission review previously. Finally, then, the private parking requirements. Since we've had a number of discussions, I assume that you're all pretty familiar with what's in the code, but some basic options to discuss if you would like. We can leave it as, P&Z recommended in the urban general 2 and storefront. That's the main core downtown. The requirement that they settled on was 0.5 spaces per bedroom and 0.25 spaces for shared parking. And then for upper floor commercial uses like office spaces, there is also a shared parking requirement in the new code. So one option, a lot of discussion about whether or not everybody's in favor of shared parking. One option is to eliminate that altogether. Also could increase the parking requirement for apartments. Could increase it up to 0.75 per bedroom. The other thing we heard a number of people discuss was, what if it's all one-bedroom apartments or studio apartments? Making sure that there's at least 1 parking space per unit. So you could add a clause to that would make sure that buildings like that would have at least 1 per unit. So those are just some ideas to throw out there of reasonable changes to discuss. And then the neighborhood frontages would be, also a similar things that we would point out. So with that, just be happy to answer any questions and help with any discussion that you might want to have. And then finally, we could talk about next steps and, what you decide tonight.
Can you put that last slide back up again so we can finish it? Thank you.
With that, just to ensure folks know who are watching at home and in the gallery, this is a work session, which is the lowest level of discussion that council has as a public meeting. We go from here to a committee of the whole to a city council meeting. And typically a work session is going to be in one of the conference rooms, and it's very informal. It's just discussion. So during this, I'm not going to call on council members. We're just going to have a discussion. With the work session, there's not a provision for public comment during it, but certainly very happy for you to have you here to watch the deliberations. And then there's not going to be a vote out of this tonight. All we can legally do in a work session is obtain some sort of a council consensus on how they'd like to proceed forward. Staff would then bring something either to Planning and Zoning Commission to then make its way up through, or some things might find its way to a committee of the whole. But just for tonight, that's why you'll see it as informal as we can get, because we need to have as honest of back and forth question and dialogue as possible. So with that, it's just an open discussion for council.
Just to throw this out there, see, there's a lot of material here, and so that we can be efficient within our conversation, maybe we could break up each topic in here and kind of get a consensus on where we're going rather than bouncing around. So we could maybe do vinyl siding, parking, P&Z, or something like that, get a consensus and move on. Otherwise, I get nervous we may just spin circles. But
Sure.
that's up to the rest of council and the...
Anybody object to kind of breaking it out like that for individual topics? Okay. So what do we want to tackle first then?
Let's go with vinyl siding.
Well, you want to just go down the list?
Or sure, yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead. Whatever's, I don't have the list in front of me, sorry.
Starts with
The
shared
back
parking.
of the agenda, I think you have an agenda copy. Isn't it?
I don't have it on the back of mine. But shared parking, so we'll start with that then.
Go for it.
So who wants to open up on that, or maybe a way you'd like to see us go forward? Should we?
Just eliminate it.
Yeah, so it was discussed back in November about whether it should be like mandatory shared parking, or could the question be make it voluntary? If it's voluntary, then as my understanding was it kind of made it moot anyway, like you might as well just not have it in there. Is that right, Karen?
Yeah, anybody can share their parking if they choose to do so. You don't,
They can do that now.
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So what's on the floor then is eliminating shared parking as a requirement. And what's the other part?
As a requirement.
Yeah, right.
So one thing I was thinking about was possibly, I'd be okay with looking at eliminating that. Possibly us coming up with a council incentive or trying to get something to encourage people to share parking. Because in the parking study a couple years ago, it did say that shared parking could help alleviate some public parking issues we have, but it wouldn't solve it, obviously. It said it was a short-term solution to help out, to add more parking. So I'd like for us to be, if we're going to eliminate it, I can respect that side. I would like to possibly, as a council, we could maybe look at finding some incentives for businesses that would be willing to do that, possibly. I don't know, that's another conversation for a future day, but I think we could come up with something creative that may let people do it.
Something along that lines, then, we have talked about parking ramps for a long time. Shared parking in a sense, or the parking 600 feet away, that's another component that is just not doable in my mind. Incorporate some sort of fee in lieu of, I think is the term they use, to have a developer purchase spots in a parking ramp. They can develop valet parking for their retail, what have you, that sort of thing. But I think the parking ramp discussion needs to be had when we talk about this shared parking, or, you know, like Susan says, eliminate it, which is fine, but then how do you create more? So things have been said in the past, or discussions have been had in the past about parking ramps, and we need to bring those front and center.
It's in the CIP that we're going to vote on
Well, I understand that,
to
but
start the talks. So,
Could Karen maybe explain this off-site parking requirement that Daryl just mentioned?
I think what,
Basically, you're saying that those that have to have parking can put parking somewhere else?
no, the shared parking requirement could be satisfied by, say, say your neighbor has some additional parking that they're not using, during a peak part of the day. You could ask them, maybe you purchase it or pay them a fee, or, rent it or something, and that could satisfy your shared parking requirement if you don't have enough room on your own site. And that is what would be allowed, for you to search within 600 feet of your proposed building site for shared parking opportunities that you could partner with somebody else on that. The required parking has to be on site or has to be directly adjacent to the property. So if you have a neighbor that has parking spaces and you want to purchase that land or purchase that site, but it has to be directly on the site or right next to it.
So by eliminating the shared parking requirement, it wouldn't change what the amount of parking they're required to have. It still has to be either adjacent or
Right, it has to be on site.
on-site.
That's correct.
So would that kind of address your concerns then, Susan?
Well, I just think it's wrong to tell people they have to give away half of their property half of the time. That's why I wanted to get rid of eliminate the shared. I'm fine if we want to encourage businesses to share their parking, but I don't think you should be able to say, I'm going to use somebody else's property, or so I don't have to put my own parking in. I think that it's very important that they be required to put in whatever parking they're required to have, which is kind of the other half of this issue on here, is how many parking spots they're required to put in.
Okay, so what we're talking about, building the consensus on is shared parking as a requirement, like just dropping that. And then to Simon's point, kind of encouraging, or finding ways to encourage business owners to pursue.
I mean, yeah, again, I think that's a separate discussion, but if we're gonna drop the required shared parking, then I think it would behoove us to look at, can we offer incentives for people building? Can we look at ways that we can open up more public spaces? Obviously, we're looking at talking about a ramp and other things, but I liked the shared parking because it opens up more public spaces. But then you have that argument of the city's telling people what to do. So, you know, I can see both sides of that argument.
And Karen, this doesn't prohibit businesses from pursuing shared parking on their own in any.
No, anybody can do that.
They can satisfy those requirements by working with others. Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, just for clarification.
Sure.
You're saying that tonight we're in a work session and we're not going to have a vote, but the decisions we make are going to move on to committee as a whole? Is that how the progression works? Or what becomes of, say we say that we're going to drop the shared parking, but we don't vote on it, or we just?
Sure, that's a great question. So for Mr. Rogers, coming out of tonight, we'll have consensus on items. Does that need to go to a committee of the whole for a formal approval before it goes to planning and zoning, or can we provide basic guidance to planning and zoning here tonight?
Council could choose either way, as long as staff has sufficient information. If the decision's made to go to P&Z, as long as staff has sufficient information to prepare a petition to present to P&Z, then we can proceed that way too.
Yeah.
If there's fuzzy edges yet, and council really wants to drill down and get votes, we can go to committee.
Okay. So if at this point, if council doesn't object to it, I would want to make sure that we have the public input for this as well. And so committee of the whole would satisfy that, but this also would then go to planning and zoning, and the public would have a chance to comment there as well. So committee of the whole would be one extra step that just might not be necessary at this point. So that may change. If anybody thinks differently, feel free, and we could talk about bumping it to committee of the whole after this, but it seems like P&Z would work.
Okay.
And then it would come back up to council anyway. So, is there anything else that we need to talk about with shared parking, or can I see if there's that consensus to just drop that as a requirement? Or move to drop it?
Go ahead, Kelly.
Well, I feel like I'm repeating myself, and I know I am, and I may not be in the majority of this, but I'm going to make sure I keep voicing my thoughts on this. Parking has been a problem or a discussion in Cedar Falls the whole time I've lived here. So for almost 26 years, College Hill and downtown, everybody talks about parking and how it's a problem. I feel like there's the outliers. There's the people who are really stirred up about it. There's the people who maybe don't even pay attention to it. And then there's the people like me who, I guess, I feel like walkability and I feel like there's not a problem. I feel like, but I'm always willing to have the discussion. Hence, we're going to have the discussion about the parking garage that we plan on in the CIP. I guess this is the things I want to point out. When people say that Cedar Falls, the city, never does anything about parking, I don't know where that comes from. There's been 2 parking studies in recent years. The studies who were done by staff and a group, I believe, that was put together of community Main Street folks and citizens. Is that true? Then we decided that was not good enough, so we decided to hire a professional. Both of those showed that the professional showed we were over parking our downtown, correct?
Over parking residential, under parking commercial.
Okay, either way. And I will take blame when last year when we had a discussion brought back to us about parking and the effects of COVID, and it was brought back to us at the council saying, you know, that there was business owners downtown that had concerns about paid parking at this time. And, you know, I remember us having the conversation of, okay, we're going to support this and we're going to take away paid parking, but remember this moment because it's going to come back. And it did. It came back like just a couple months later. And nobody wants to give. It's a me situation. So people asked for creativity. So the consultants gave us creative ideas, which included shared parking. I wish that folks, and I believe there are some folks out there that can see it's not a me situation. If we can all support each other, neighbors, business owners, that is going to help the vibe of our place to come type feel in downtown Cedar Falls that most of us love and appreciate. Another thing that I'll bring up, because, walkability or how big how long it takes to walk around the neighborhood or the downtown area. Our downtown, if you overlay one of the big box stores that's out south of town on our downtown area, that building and its lot reaches from 2nd Street all the way to 4th Street, and then it reaches from State Street over to Washington Street. People don't even bat an eye to that. They'll walk from the back of the parking lot over to a building. There is no such thing as free parking. We are creating a place where people want to be. And part of that wanting to be is, in my mind, and I believe I'm not the minority, is parking and taking a stroll through your businesses. I mean, a citizen wrote a great email to us where around the holidays, he parked somewhere. And as he walked by a business that smelled really good inside, he went in and dropped $75 on their product. That wouldn't happen and if somebody is not taking that walk. And even if we build a parking ramp, you're still going to have to walk. If that parking ramp goes on 4th and Washington, say, you're still going to have to walk up to 1st and, or to 2nd and State, or vice versa. Like, I understand we're here for consensus, and I just want to make sure that we're remembering that I can appreciate disagreeing on stuff, but I can't go behind or get behind stuff where we're putting out misinformation. And I feel like there's a lot of misinformation, and we shouldn't be making decisions on fear and misinformation.
Okay, thank you. So we are here for consensus building.
Mr. Mayor?
You don't need permission. It's just-
What's that?
You don't need permission. It's just
Okay,
discussion.
I just want to weigh in a little bit. I've been against shared parking from the beginning. I believe when you own a property, that is yours. I don't think the city should take that away and give that to others, but I'm kind of old school in those kinds of things. So I've been against it the entire time. I haven't changed my mind.
All right.
That's all.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Look, so we can move forward to maybe one other item tonight on this, at least. What do we see for shared parking of dropping that? Do I have some head nods for that we're willing to do that?
To eliminate shared.
To eliminate shared parking as a requirement? That's all the couple there. And
I'm willing to look at it, sure. My whole thing is, I want to see this implemented, and I want to see us try some things and be creative. If we can compromise on making it mandatory, I can see that philosophical argument, so I'm willing to go ahead with dropping the shared parking.
So Karen, does that give you enough info to move ahead with?
So it looks like we have a consensus
Yeah.
or a majority that want to move forward with eliminating shared parking. Okay?
Okay, thanks. So what's the next on that
Well,
list?
the second half of that one on the agenda was the private parking ratio requirements, which they really kind of dovetail together. So it just seemed to me that if you reduce the parking, it creates more of a need for parking. We had a compromise before when we talked about it. On the slide that you had up there, I don't know if that was the compromise suggested, or if you could go over what
There it is, yeah. Well, this is just something that we're throwing out there, is if, the shared parking requirement was 0.25 spaces per bedroom, which would have been basically able to be used by the property owner for, a good portion of the time. So if you wanted to just translate that into a requirement and shift it from 0.5 to 0.75 per bedroom, that would increase the parking requirement that's on the books right now. And then the other clause is, if you want to discuss any concerns about if you had a building with all one-bedroom units in it, whether there's some minimum.
Yeah, it seemed like
one per
number
unit.
3 was the compromise that we had come up with when we talked before. But it seems like that is best used if it also has the number 4 item also co-joined with it, so that, each unit has to have at least one spot.
Yeah, so is that something we could build consensus on here too, is that recommendation of going from 0.5 to 0.75, but still with that clause, not less than one space? That means there always will be a space, or they would never round down or miss that.
Is that a reduction from anything that's currently required?
Karen?
A
for that?
reduction. Right now, I think
Yeah.
how it's applied downtown is one space per bedroom.
So yeah, it would be a reduction.
Reduction.
For like a 2-bedroom unit, you'd have 1.5 instead of 2. Or a 3-bedroom unit, you'd have, 2.25, correct?
That's right.
So I could live with that.
Okay, though, now, I've mentioned this before in different meetings and talking to people, that we're encouraging building downtown, multi-use, more retail, commercial space, but we've not added any space for additional customers and shoppers and wait staff at the restaurants and bars. And I had an example that I calculated at a council meeting a number of months ago. There's almost 4,000 4,000 fire load accepted occupants in all the bars and restaurants downtown. And if all of them are half full, that's 2,000 people. And if all of them come 2 in a car, you have 1,000 cars. And that dramatically exceeds what we have for any parking that would be not already allocated to the residents who don't have an on-site spot. Because our parking study showed that 1/3 of those residents that live downtown don't have a dedicated spot to themselves, and they use the city streets or the parking lot. So we have to entertain a discussion of future growth in these standards for parking on retail parking spaces added. We got to do that, or else we're going to be pirating, cannibalizing. As new retail comes in, they're going to be taking parking away from other businesses, customers' spots.
That's counterintuitive to what a downtown actually is, though. So then you're just going to make it a mall. Because downtown, that's the whole point of a downtown, is that you don't build all these parking lots, and you build up, you have density.
You can be subterranean, underground parking. You can build them internally in the 2nd or 3rd floor. I see examples of that in multiple cities all around Iowa and all across the country. So you can do it. It needs
So what does that mean for us
It
here?
makes everything incredibly expensive. And also, I ride share. Everyone I know, we ride share. I Uber. All the college people, all the college kids that I teach, they're not all driving downtown or driving. There's not that many cars going down there. I've never been downtown. I was downtown on Saturday night, and I could, going from place to place, and I had no issues parking. So I understand that the parking issue is contentious, and we're going to have the conversation of the garage, which I respect, and I think we talk about it. But we can't just put on hold forever how many bedrooms for a private, when private and public are 2 different entities, even though they're indirectly related. We still have to give the developers a number and give them the information they need to develop.
Well, for every 500 square feet, I think there's numbers in the code right now for 300 or 500 feet, there's another spot required, that sort of thing. But, you say you ride share places. In this room here, how many people walked here tonight? You got 3 people, okay. How many people rode their bicycle here? See, nobody. How many ride shared here tonight?
But
Everybody else?
this isn't your.
And how many are millennials? So that's what I was talking about.
Everybody drove here, so and where
Yes.
did they park?
I get it.
The Monday night.
It's a
we probably came from work.
generational thing.
They parked at the closest spot available to the front door or side door.
And who had trouble finding a parking spot? Exactly.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, Simon, when they have more retail, more bars and restaurants, people are going to be attracted to come downtown to those. And whether they go bar hopping, restaurant hopping, appetizer here and drink there, and have, they need more customer parking downtown.
I agree. And we're going to talk about the ramp, but what I'm saying is that we're not going to be able to have that if we make people have subterranean parking and all this extra parking that increases the cost of developing, so then no one's going to develop it, and we're not going to have it. Then two, the way of the future is not the car. We're trying to get away from that. We're trying to get into walking, and people smile at that, but it's true. We are getting into more biking, more walking, more ride sharing. It's going to happen. So I respect that we need to have parking for businesses. We do, and we need to look at that. But we can't put extreme clauses on how many spots we need.
What I'd like to do is kind of back up and look at the beginning of this process that our mayor very nicely put together on a Facebook post, going back to the beginning where December 2018, the council approves goals and objectives to develop a revised Cedar Falls zoning ordinance. February 2019, we hired Community Recode LLC, which, looking that firm up, they're a broad-based advisory firm on all sorts of zoning updates and codes and that sort of thing. But then from them appears Farrell Madden, who are just specifically form-based zoning people. Okay?
So, but I want to keep us focused on what.
I'm very
the
focused,
item is.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and just give me a moment. We're talking about what the parking ratios are going to be.
Right.
So,
We can talk about that.
and we can
we're-
talk
we're-
about this for probably 2 hours. We're
Well-
not going to have that time tonight.
The thing I want to point out here is that we went down a rabbit hole into form-based zoning. And it's not on the list here to discuss that the character areas that were adopted basically erased the zoning, the traditional zoning, which takes away property rights for people. People, lose what they've
Which
had.
property rights were taken away, besides the shared parking, which we're talking
Well-
about taking?
Okay, well, let me,
It allows things in, for instance, R1 and R2 that weren't allowed before.
Like what?
Well, like on the sheet that they gave us, the small MF and the cottage courts, it also changes your building sizes.
So, hold on. The cottage,
I'm going off the sheet we just saw here maybe a half hour ago.
yeah. So the cottage courts were allowed in 3 and 4,
And not
Before.
R1, R2.
and now on R1 and R2, and now they're allowed here, but only 1.5 blocks of the entire area was R2, and there's no R1. So how many houses do we have that have had their rights taken away from them due
Well,
to?
I look at it that this is the blueprint for the next one that they want to do, which is 100-plus blocks, in which there is a lot of R1, R2.
But that's not
That's-
I know
true.
that's not on the agenda
That-
right now.
It isn't, but that's not, I guess, to me, that's not how form-based zoning works. Form-based zoning is, it's formed for that area, and that's what's beautiful about it. It's tailored. So if they came back to me with form-based zoning that was exactly like downtown for an all R1 area, I would say absolutely not. That wouldn't work, because that's not the character of the area. Form-based zoning is designed to protect the character of that area. That's what's beautiful about it.
Yeah, the part that's kind of difficult on it is that the area is so big.
On the next one,
Well, like even on this one, if what we really wanted to do was work on the downtown area, this really expands a lot further than just downtown.
Okay, and
I
I'm
have
going to give us,
questions,
for a time budget, we do have committee of the whole tonight as well. So that's supposed to start at 5:50. I'm going to give us another 6 minutes on this.
Okay.
I would love to see us come to some sort of additional consensus to give to staff. If not, we're looking at many more additional meetings.
Okay, let me continue with my train of thought here, Mr. Mayor. So we jumped into Farrell Madden as a form-based specialist. We zoomed right into that, or went into a rabbit hole. And then one of the items that was presented was requesting, this is on the 2018 directives from council, to request that planning and zoning develop as part of the new zoning ordinance areas that are pre-zoned. And this is the area that I am a bit concerned about, or very concerned. And then after that, it says, select properties for residential development and pre-zone them in an effort to speed up the development process.
And again, I'm going to bring us back to parking that we're talking about. I feel like you're hijacking this to talk about a big discussion of trying to repeal the entire code, and that's not what we're talking about.
Well, Mr. Mayor, that is an element of the whole discussion, how we got down this rabbit hole. And I'm using your own Facebook post that I see a consensus in my mind to repeal this thing, find out how to do that, and then pick out the components that various neighborhoods might want to have. Like some neighborhoods might choose to have accessory dwelling units and incorporate it into their local covenants, and some may not. I know Cherrywood had a really hard time with one person splitting a lot and doing so and so on. So
Well,
I think the process has been railroaded into a certain area here at the form-based zoning, and many of these things we talk about can be incorporated into our traditional zone, and people don't lose their property rights.
well,
It looks, go ahead, Simon.
I was just going to say, I disagree with that completely, like 100+%. But fair enough. I was here under the impression that we would talk about amending some things and working and getting, and then push forward and try to grow Cedar Falls together. So I'm just going to flat out say that I am 100% not in favor of repealing this. There were a few things that I would be willing to compromise on to make some people happy and push forward with a beautiful thing. I think that the zoning, I think it's great. So I hope that we won't, as a council, go backwards on this. I think that we should look at a few things that were contentious, make some more people happy, and push forward and then troubleshoot if we have some issues in the future. That's where I'm at.
I got a question for Karen. What's the parking requirement for rental homes?
For
Per
rental? Well, for like apartments, so you're talking?
Say that I had a three-bedroom home. How many parking spots would I be required to have?
Just in general in Cedar Falls?
Yeah,
So it'd be basically one per bedroom.
okay.
But-
So I'm just looking for the difference there then. And I like to walk, I like to bike. I own 4 cars, and I got them somewhere. Doesn't prohibit me from walking downtown, but, you know, what do we do with the cars that people do have?
Could a compromise be on this to send to planning and zoning, having not one space per unit, but requiring one space per bedroom? Could we?
That's-
I think that's what it should be.
I mean, I think
More than I need,
that's more than what the study said we needed. And I mean, I get it. Some people have 4 cars. I have 4 bedrooms and 2 cars. And a lot of the people that are buying these newer homes, it's like my mom. She wants to buy a condo. She wants to buy a 3-bedroom condo. She has 1 car. And you're just raising the prices up of what it's going to cost to build. You pay for parking one way or the other. There's a ton of great studies and research through a lot of very well-known engineers.
The uniqueness, though, Simon, and the rest of listening, we have a river on basically 2 sides of the downtown that blocks any expansion and walkability to go out to the east and to the north. 1 per bedroom, if they're not used by the resident, can be used by the customers of the retail shop owners, the wait staff, the employees of the
You
shop.
just took away the shared parking, so
Not in their own building is what I'm saying, not remotely. I'm saying in that building. Okay?
And you're going to allow the public to park there?
and you're going to allow the public, their customers
That's
to
up
park
to
there?
the merchant, or the developer, the building owner to do so on his own property, right there. That's always been the case that he can do now and should do to support happy tenants. But I again got to go back to the beginning of this process and say that we went down a rabbit hole, and for some reason we are thinking that we got to stay in this rabbit hole of form-based zoning, and I totally disagree. I mean, I want to see a repeal, because my understanding is that there was a lot of questions in planning and zoning, and from their take on it, there's like, let's shove it to council and see what happens. And so it's just,
Well, No one
I
said
think
that
that's
to me.
disrespectful to planning and zoning.
I think planning and zoning put a lot of effort into it and a
I
lot
really
of
did,
thought.
but I'm just repeating what I hear.
Well, you don't hear everything.
But repeating something that's not true does not help anything. So if we're going to compromise, let's compromise
not-
on facts.
How do you know it's not true?
I do want to just clarify one thing. Community Recode is Elizabeth Garvin, who you heard from. She's a one-person firm. She was hired by Farrell Madden. Farrell Madden was the firm that we contracted with. The reason that Elizabeth, the Recode, was put on the contract was because she had the insurance they needed to meet the city's requirements. So they were all one group. We hired them all at the same time.
Okay.
So looking at the minute that we have left, do we have any kind of consensus for parking that we want to send to
Let-
planning and zoning? And let's let others speak, please, also. So are we willing to have planning and zoning look at 0.75 spaces per unit and then a minimum of at least one parking space per unit?
I'm okay with sending it to planning and zoning because there goes the other aspect of planning and zoning still does have power. So they can review what we've agreed on. And if they don't like it, they can kick it back and we'll go from there.
I'm okay with the point, with what staff had put up there, was sending it back and seeing what planning and zoning's thoughts are with
Basically
it.
3 and 4, and to see what they think.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing 3 head nods there. Did I get a 4th? Okay.
When, the one thing I've always had an issue with is the form-based zoning takes out planning and zoning, and I like to see the compromises that go on there at planning and zoning and with the zoning commission and the citizens, where the developer and the citizens get together and work on something.
That'll be a discussion for a different night. We'll talk about
Right,
future
but
planning and zoning. in there.
when Daryl said to rescind it all, you could do that, because I've been against that form-based zoning right out of the gate. I don't think it's a good idea for our community. I like the 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's not like that was developed in the 1970s and then never changed. We've changed it all along. We have overlay districts, we have all kinds of things. We could have an overlay district downtown and grab some of the good things, but to start to move that out into the rest of the city, I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay, so that's what we have for tonight for this topic. We'll certainly need to have additional work
Mr.
sessions.
Mayor, we could finish the topic about rescinding it, go back to planning and zoning, figure out, evaluate what we want to keep, and then get rid of what we don't want. We can have the conversation with the parking again down the road.
We have other topics to discuss tonight too for committee of the whole. If we want to come back in a next, we'll schedule another downtown zoning discussion as a work session, and rescinding could be a topic for that, but I don't think that that's going to go anywhere.
Don't know about that.
I don't want to see it rescinded at all, so.
Well, like I
mean, if-
said, we will keep the good stuff in simple terms. We'll keep what makes
What's-
sense,
What's good?
and, well, we'll discuss that. But we went down a rabbit hole of form-based zoning where we erase all the traditional zones that people have their livelihoods on their homes and their businesses, and you're taking away, and we had 80 businesses protest or more. So we got to listen to that.
I don't believe it was 80
It wa-
businesses.
It was like 70-something, unless there were more signed, which is fair.
That's
They
significant.
have
Bring
their-
that data
significant.
forward in the next meeting. So I will call this, if we have a consensus, to bring it with 0.75 spaces and a minimum of 1 per unit. That'll go back to planning and zoning for discussion, Karen?
I thought they upped that to just 1 per unit.
I think 1 per unit is what we want.
Yeah,
That's what I
did I
understood.
misspeak? Yeah, one per unit.
I thought it was 1 per bedroom.
Planning and
Yeah.
zoning.
Doesn't
One
matter,
per bedroom.
Yeah.
Could we see two, well, I guess it's kind of pointless if there's consensus for 1 per bedroom. I was going to say, could we see a couple options on what it could look like with less?
So, okay, I'm a little confused.
So
So what I heard
looking at
was
3 and 4.
eliminate the shared parking and do, on the sheet here, basically do number 2, 3, and 4.
That's what I thought, but,
Is that our consensus? I thought that was our consensus earlier, too.
But number 3 would be 1 per bedroom.
Yeah.
So that's basically what the requirement is now downtown. So it'd go
Yeah.
back to what it is now.
That's fine.
I mean,
That's what I understood.
Yes.
They changed it to, was,
I think that's fine because, like I said, the property owner can allow parking for his resident
It's-
retail owners and other people to park
Two-
there. It makes total sense.
I think that's too many to require. If they want to build that many, they can, but I think requiring that many, it is,
It's requiring what's required now.
yes, correct. Well, actually, incorrect. What's required now is 0.5 plus the 0.25, because we adopted that, or approved
The
that.
former parking for the commercial areas downtown.
But, so I don't have a consensus for, even if I'm in the minority, for one per bedroom.
Okay.
I don't want to go that many.
So is that would not be consensus then, if Simon's out?
I think we have consensus on the one per bedroom. Want a show of hands?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
One per bedroom?
We got 5.
Okay. All right, so we have consensus for that. And that is all we'll have time to talk about tonight. So with that, I'll end our work session, and we will take 5 minutes to reset for committee of the whole.